Thank you very much, Mr. Shanaha, for kind introduction, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is indeed a great pleasure for me to have this opportunity to speak at this esteemed gathering of Credit Suisse for top managers, investors from all around the world. I am especially happy to talk to you when investors' interest towards Japan is high on their list. And surprisingly enough, it is politics this time that drew investors' attention towards Japan for the first time in probably many, many years. As you all know, Prime Minister Abe, who delivered the keynote speech at this conference last year, visited Washington, D.C. in February and made a speech declaring Japan is back. Although his message addressed a wide range of issues, I would like to focus this morning on the economic front. And reviving Japan's economy is the top of the priority agenda for the new administration, and that is what you are most interested in hearing about. Until a little while ago, the majority in our Liberal Democratic Party placed first priority on fiscal consolidation, whereas I belong to the minority camp, which considered higher growth of Japanese economy the top priority. Using the theme that the greatest and the most urgent task was the revival of Japanese economy, Mr. Abe swept to a landslide victory last December. Now the Abe administration is powerfully proceeding with an economic policy package that, as many of you already know, is called Abenomics. The Prime Minister himself has said that he is setting forth a bold policy package of a nature totally different from what used to be implemented. The question becomes, how different? It is well known that Abenomics consists of three elements, which are often called the three arrows. First, bold monetary easing aiming at ending deflation and achieving 2% inflation target. Second, a flexible fiscal policy to sustain economic growth in the shorter run. And third, a growth strategy to encourage private economic activities in the longer run. With respect to how different these policies are, I think the first arrow, bold monetary easing, has a very new dimension. It took strong leadership to the Prime Minister to have the government and the Bank of Japan agree to daringly overhauling our policy framework and achieving a 2% inflation target. To this end, in the Diet, we have just approved the nomination of a new Bank of Japan governor and deputy governors. The new governor, who many of you probably know well, Mr. Kuroda, the former president of the Asian Development Bank, said firmly during the confirmation hearing in the Diet that there is substantial room for further monetary easing. I do believe the Bank of Japan will take bold steps to clearly end deflation, which has lasted for more than a decade, and to achieve a 2% inflation target at the earliest possible time. As the second arrow, a supplementary budget amounting to 13 trillion yen, worth more than 140 billion US dollars, has already been approved by the Diet. This fiscal stimulus is expected to create 600,000 new jobs and to lift the growth of Japan's economy by 2% in the coming year. With this fiscal expenditure, uncertainties over Japan's economy have greatly receded, and these sentiments, both in the business and the household sectors, have significantly improved. I believe the change in government from DPJ to LDP has also a great impact. But in the longer run, With an already huge public debt, there is no possible way to keep spending to support Japan's economy through fiscal stimuli. We have committed ourselves not to go back to the old LDP style of vested interest sharing. Thus, if there is any new dimension regarding the fiscal policy hereafter, it would be what we will not be business as usual and follow the same old ways. The first and second arrows have been shot, and we can already observe good signs in the economy. Investors, both domestic and abroad, have started to buy Japanese shares, and the equity prices on the Tokyo Stock Exchange have substantially increased. Promising figures related to macroeconomic indicators such as the corporate productions and the household consumption are coming out. The third arrow, growth strategy, is still on the way and is extremely important for the new administration to make clear that the whole policy package is totally different from what used to be implemented. Actually, this arrow addresses issues which are once called structural reform. That label sounds a bit old-fashioned, but it goes to the core issues which have plagued Japan's economy for decades. We have to strengthen the profitability of firms in Japan by eliminating factors which block competitiveness and innovation. If we miss the mark with this third arrow, I'm afraid we may repeat not only a lost decade or lost 2 decades, but a lost 3 decades. Therefore, our government has a strong incentive to make this third arrow a powerful breakthrough to rescue and revive Japan's economy. A headquarters for Japan's economic revitalization has been established in order to craft a comprehensive policy package, and an Industrial Competitiveness Council has been established under it. The Prime Minister himself chairs the council, and the members are the related cabinet members and the private sector experts. It will formulate growth strategy plan by early June, focusing on areas like scrapping and building of businesses, the enhancement of human capitals, infrastructure competitiveness, clean and efficient energy, health and longevity, agriculture, and scientific innovation. From my point of view, scrapping and building of businesses is vital. Compared with other advanced economies, new business starts and old business scraps are extremely stagnant in Japan. This must be changed. We must stop easy lending to zombie companies by banks, and mutual stock holdings among firms and financial institutions be an area to reform. Stock holdings by banks might be another area. This I scratch your back and you scratch mine type of interdependence is by no means good for profitability and productivity of Japanese economy. In order to remove this conspiracy type among old-fashioned businesses, I believe corporate governance should function more efficiently. Shareholders should not allow managers of firms and banks to maintain the status quo without serious considerations regarding efficiency and profitability, and the mechanisms to accelerate shifts of business resources from low profitable areas to more profitable areas should be established. More open domestic markets are also crucial. The size of domestic markets will inevitably shrink along with our continuing aging population. We must maximize benefits from the global trade, which will also lead to benefits for our trading partners. In this regard, Prime Minister Abe has decided to join the negotiation process of TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. Let me say that TPP is just one of several mechanisms which can be used to further open up Japanese economy. Simultaneously, we will keep working on EPA or FTA arrangements with other countries and regions. The most important goal here is effectively strengthen Japan's long-term growth potential through structural changes that comes together with more market openings. Further deregulation is another important challenge. Japan has long discussed deregulation, and while you may believe that the situation has not changed remarkably, but this time, let me repeat this time, the determination of our government is a little bit different. I do know that there are many conflicting views on the issues noted above in Japan, and of course within the politics, and especially in the LDP. However, with Japan's quickly aging demography and the ever-increasing steps towards globalization, it cannot be possible to totally deny more globalization and more deregulation. The basis for an all-or-nothing argument on these issues does not make any sense. There must be some point where you can craft a well-balanced compromise from diverse opinions. It is one of the most important responsibilities of the ruling party and politicians to correctly find such equilibrium. The expression of 3 arrows originates from a historical story of one of the eminent warlords of the 16th century, before the era of Tokugawa. The warlord, whose name was Motonari Mori, had 3 good sons, and he told them, before passing away, that an individual arrow could be easily broken, but if 3 arrows get together, it becomes much harder to break them, implying that the 3 sons should closely cooperate and fight against their enemies together. The irony of the story is that even with the brothers' cooperation, the Mori family could not rule whole Japan. Probably 3 arrows were not enough to achieve a lasting success. This story might be an allegory for Abenomics. As I have explained, the 3rd arrow, growth strategy, is vital and is the key to rescue and revive Japan's economy. But in order to make it effective enough, I believe the Abe administration needs more arrows in its quiver. In this regard, the LDP has established its own headquarters to draft new policy plans for economic growth. When Mr. Abe became Prime Minister, the first time I supported him as Chief Cabinet Secretary, but this time I am on the party side. As the acting head of the Headquarters for Economic Revival, as well as the acting chairman of Policy Board of LDP, it is my responsibility to provide the Prime Minister with further practical ideas for economic growth. To show our seriousness and commitment to economic growth inside the LDP headquarters, we have 8 teams which cover macroeconomic policies, revitalization of regional economies in countryside, and deregulation and productivity improvement, corporate governance, education, industrial policies, and research and development. We are open to and willing to listen to anyone who has creative ideas to revive the economy. I quite welcome this morning your views as well. We collect information, evaluate, and distill into practical policy plans, and cooperate with the government, and finally provide the administration with more arrows than can be used to keep revive our economy. Amongst these ideas, as I have already stated, an improvement of corporate governance system is fundamental and important. In order to make Japan's companies more dynamic, open, transparent, and profitable, a statutory independent director on the board of directors should be introduced. We should also achieve more diversity within the board members of Japanese firms. Financial markets with the full global standards are also essential. We cannot take too much time before adopting the international financial reporting standards. Improvement of asset management policy of GPIF, Government Pension Investment Fund, with assets of over $1 trillion must be realized by expanding the scope of investment such as private equities. Again, the key point is to induce smoother entrances and exits of businesses, thereby improve productivity as a whole as we achieve a higher growth potential for Japanese economy. I'm confident that many other strategies will be emerging from LDP headquarters. The Abe administration and the LDP acknowledge a timeline. Naturally, one of the first milestones is the upper house election scheduled for this summer, July. It is all the more important because it is likely that there will be no national-wide election within 3 years after that. In order for us to create a cohesive and effective government which can efficiently and effectively implement policies which will benefit Japan, it is desirable for our ruling coalition to enjoy majority status in both the lower house and the upper house. And not having majorities in both houses increases the risk that indecisive politics may return to haunt us again. And Tokyo Stock Exchange has already begun to price in such political stability of Japan. Secondly, from the viewpoint of ending deflation, I believe this time next year, will be very important. Recently, our government has been asking firms which have recorded good profits to raise the wages of their employees because one aspect of the current lingering deflation is the downward feedback between wages and output prices. That must be changed into an upward one where sanguine economic activities lead to higher profits and then to higher wages. Without such upward feedback, it is quite difficult to achieve a stable, mild inflation. I hope we will be able to observe such a situation in spring of next year that will enable the Abe administration to continue longer than a year, which is unfortunately very rare in recent years, but is a prerequisite to rescuing and reviving Japanese economy and placing it on a steady course based on the forthcoming growth strategy. Last month, Prime Minister Abe said in Washington, D.C., not only Japan is back, but also he is back. Now we in the LDP are strongly backing him up, committed to rescuing and reviving Japan's economy, and we are determined to show concrete results on each of the timelines. Before ending my remarks, let me touch upon the March 11th earthquake and tsunami devastation. Just 2 years have passed, and the reconstruction effort is still underway. There are still 320,000 people living in temporary housing, of which 160,000 cannot yet go back home because of the nuclear accident in Fukushima. I would like to express my sincere gratitude to all of you for your concern and support since the earthquake. The Japanese will never forget the warm kindness shown to us during this time of hardship. And recovery from the disaster goes hand in hand with our effort to revive the economy. And thank you very much for all of your help, and we have to keep in mind that a robust recovery in Tohoku will only occur with a strong revival of the Japanese economy. And ultimately, we will recover confidence and pride in our nation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Yozaki-san, for a very interesting point, which I'm sure will now open for an interesting discussion. Our first question.
Even before the new governor of Bank of Japan, if you compare the quantitative easing undergoing by the BOJ, Japanese economy is roughly a third of the size of the American. The Americans are easing at about 85 billion a month. The BOJ is currently going at about two-thirds the size of that. So relative to America, it's going at about 75% faster. Do you see there being any limit to the size of the BOJ's balance sheet?
Thank you very much for the question. Maybe the most important point or the big difference between old governor, or Mr. Shirakawa and Kuroda, it should be the power to persuade the market. And I don't think there isn't any numerical limit. You just mentioned about what's the size, the ceiling of the balance sheet. But I think what is most important is how persuasive the governor will be to the market, and that would ultimately decide the size. And I hope the size of balance sheet of Bank of Japan will not be too unnatural in future.
Can you please help us understand why Abe could not revive the economy when he was first elected as prime minister? And why can he do it now?
I think in politics, what is very important is to make the priority clear. And at that time, in 2006 and 2007, as I was helping Prime Minister Abe as a chief cabinet secretary, I think we had too many agenda. And I think the message to the market and the people was not so clear as to what is the priority list of your government. And this time, we made it clear, together with Mr. Abe, when he decided to fight the presidential election of LDP in September, that he will put economic revival is the top priority. And he started to do that ever since. And he made it even more clear that economy should be revived as a top priority agenda of Abe administration. And that is the difference.
Yes, you mentioned that previously the vested interests in the LDP were a problem and one of the major challenges will be to make sure that those vested, or that old LDP type structure doesn't come back and block reform. What landmarks or what sort of points of progress should we look for to see whether the LDP is succeeding in that challenge?
I guess what you are trying to say is that we will not be so successful in doing that. But of course, as I said, there must be strong resistance if we really try to make a breakthrough in any issue. But Prime Minister Abe made it clear in the speech made in this Diet session in January. He made two important promises. One is he will not introduce policies that are just an extension of old policies. And the second is we cannot just keep spending. That means we will not go back to the old days. So I think you're right, and I'm a little concerned, how strong the resistance will be in any issue. But I guess his determination as a prime minister to fight against those resistance is the most important political will to make a breakthrough. So I will help him. And of course, there are many arguments coming out from colleagues in LDP, but we will try much harder than before.
Let's say that the policies you've outlined are successful in the short term. How do you deal with Japan's longer-term challenges, though, of a declining population, fewer workers, et cetera? And don't those really have to be addressed to truly set Japan on the path to prosperity?
I guess you are completely correct that we have to fight with long-term structural problems such as social security issues. And of course, we are all acknowledged that we will have to tackle with those long-term problems too. And also fiscal consolidation that we cannot get away with. So, but we all have to remember that without robust economy, we cannot overcome fiscal consolidation issue or social security issue. And also how we can reform the administration, how we can cut the spending that are not necessary. And that kind of stuff must be addressed maybe after making this economic recovery back on track. And of course, we have already, the government has already started like administrative reform headquarters and all that kind of stuff. But I think the most important thing right now is to shift from non-economic issue to economic issue, which will enable us to fight with the long-term problems too.
Excuse me. You mentioned that the third arrow being the key of determining success. Can you share with us what are the potential difficulties you might encounter in trying to execute the third arrow?
I think the most difficult issue would be how we can be successful to change business community and how we can really invite new entrances and new venture businesses to start. And that has been one of the problems that we have been suffering. And also, as I said, we have to change the culture of keep zombie companies as they are, backed up by the structural problems, or I would say, the system that enable those zombie companies to survive. And that's not politically easy, but otherwise we cannot be successful in reviving Japanese economy.
Hi, I have a question regarding the bond market. Maybe my numbers are not exactly correct, but I'm broadly in the right path. If I'm not mistaken, about 32% of the government tax revenues today goes into interest payments. And the average cost of your debt is about 66 basis points. So let's say you're successful in getting that 2.5–3% inflation. It'll be quite logical to assume that your bond market will have to start reflecting that, which means your average cost of your interest will go north of 3%. So I find it very difficult to reconcile the two. Do you see what I'm saying? As in, like, your interest payments on the debt, which is at 65 basis points, will have to start reflecting 300–400 basis points that a bond market will force you to pay if you're successful in raising the inflation to 2.5–3%. So which means, theoretically speaking, your annual interest payments will be more than 1.5 times your annual tax receipts. Yes, you will have a benefit from a growing economy, tax receipts will grow and stuff like that, but it's a bit like, how do you balance the two? That's the first question. And the second thing is, a significant portion of your banking system owns your own government paper. Would you force them to mark to market if, let's say they hold 30 JGBs, and all of a sudden the inflation expectations move to the 3–4% level? Just those two questions, please. Thank you.
Very difficult and theoretical one. First question, I think theoretically there could be such argument as you just depicted. But we have to start from the status quo, the fiscal position, and make it in a better way, in a right way, meaning ultimately we have to decrease the outstanding debt. But that won't be coming maybe in a decade probably. But we have to do it. And the way we will do it is, one, increase the revenue. But how? I think economic recovery is the best choice, and the increase in tax rate itself should be the second. And also, we have to cut spending, including Social Security issue that the gentleman here already cited. So we have to really make up. After making success in rolling this economy again, and try to invite the situation where such argument will not come. And also the second question is mark-to-market issue. And I think in the past, other governments of other countries made different responses to crisis situation. And I think the most important thing is to avoid such crisis.
Thank you for your presentation. Just to raise one question. I mean, obviously, you are rightly pointing that the deflation side of the problem to be addressed by quantitative easing and the new governor of the BOJ. But on the real economy side, which basically corporate are reluctant to make investment. They are not the lack of money. They have lots of savings. If a corporate does not want to invest, and on the consumer side, They're not consuming more because of aging process. No matter how much inflation can bring back, if corporate doesn't want to invest, if consumer doesn't consume more, spending more, we're the driver of the economic growth in the coming decade. Thank you.
I think, as you correctly pointed out, the most fundamental problem of Japanese economy is that companies are not investing, just making good reserve. And what is the reason for that? And we have to address to the real cause of those behavior of companies, corporations, not to invest. And I think one of the answers to that is make demand. But you need great wisdom to create demand, and it's a long-term issue. And this time, I guess, we are trying to touch upon the reform in, say, education and universities. Although we do have power in our nation to have Nobel Prize winner like IPS Yamanaka Sensei, but you'll be surprised how many Nobel Prize winners of Japanese Nobel Prize winners are now living in the United States, and maybe forever. And also, you'll be surprised there is none foreign Nobel Prize winner making research right now in Japan. And I think we should have to increase the power to create something new. Thus, we can make more demands. And we used to have like Sony's Walkman and all kind of stuff, all created by Japanese companies. But now we are now losing the ground on how to make new things. And probably that comes from the culture of Japanese society, and also university is one of the most stiff society that we have to change.
Mr. Shiozaki, I'm very encouraged by your comments, and also, of course, very enjoy the rally of Japanese equity market for the past 3 months. I have 3 short questions. I think the answers should be short as well. You mentioned that banks should stop lending to the zombie companies. Could you clarify what kind of companies are zombie companies? Sharp came to my mind, the company you guys probably follow very well. Came to my mind. Could you clarify about that? The second one is the corporate governance issue. I believe many good Japanese companies have the takeover defense plan. In Japanese, the Baishu Boesaku. For us, poison pill for us does not make sense. What's your thoughts on that? The third question is, you didn't mention the lifetime employment, the Shushin Koyo. How do you do with that? Thank you.
Again, fundamental problems. Zombie companies. We are now expecting to see a piece of legislation that is going to be expired by the end of this month. That is a piece of legislation that was created by Mr. Kamei, who used to be the minister in charge of FSA. That the legislation that allowed zombie companies to be as zombie companies, as far as FSA would admit that they are not zombies through inspection. But we're going to stop it. And so small and medium-sized companies, mainly, because large-sized companies are so ashamed to ask for that kind of help, you know. So small and medium-sized companies, but that is all around the world, the nation, in each corner of Japanese economy. And usually I guess that's banks, mainly local banks. Well, maybe not local, not only local banks, but big banks too. They're the ones who can really allow those companies to stay on. So I think we have to do that. And some politicians are very concerned about the timing of changing the whole policy towards these zombie companies, because we are expecting to have our private election. But I guess that won't be a big issue. Second one is corporate governance. You talked about the measure to protect TOB and all that kind of stuff. And what's the point of your question?
If they are confident in their business, why do they have the point of appeal for the investors, like long-term investors like us? Because TOB for us is a very good catalyst to monetize our long-term positions.
Well, Japanese companies are not driven by shareholders, power. Actually, that's another point. Well, the issue that must be addressed in Japanese economy, and I think so many financial institutions are having chairs but saying nothing, like in the case of TEPCO or Olympus. There was no word from shareholders. But I guess that create a situation where only the managers of companies who have brought up from the bottom to top, and those managers tend to be rather inward-looking. So that's the issue, I guess. So we have to make a real capitalists in Japan. And you talked about shushin koyo. I think it's inevitable that we will have to change the whole labor market policy. And I think the private companies are already widening the kinds of labor forces that they are asking for. And also, I think the employees are also becoming more diversified, so that we have to change the legislations and rules in labor policy. And that's, again, is one of the most important issues for Abenomics, and to make it more flexible labor market in Japan. Otherwise, companies cannot be more, profitable and quick to respond to any changes in the global market.
We have time for 2 more questions from the back.
Thank you very much. Can we get your thoughts on the energy front, nuclear power, LNG imports, et cetera, et cetera?
I think we have to confess that for many, many years under LDP government, we have put little stress on safety of nuclear energy. And that really made this devastation in Fukushima. And so I sponsored a legislation to first look into the real causes of this accident this time by creating an independent investigation committee in the Diet appointed by us. And they successfully released a report last year. I think that is the only independent investigation report on this accident. And second legislation that I sponsored is to create a new commission on nuclear regulation. And unless we establish at least a minimum culture of new regulatory framework, people won't agree in the countryside where nuclear plants are now stopped, would agree to restart nuclear power plants. But our government, Abe administration, is eager to restart nuclear power plants. And I think our Prime Minister is pretty much determined to continue to have nuclear power as a stable source of energy in Japan. But of course, we have to spend more money on renewable energy too. And we're also expecting to have shale gas from the United States after discussing between these two leaders in February.
Just a couple of small questions. Following the AIJ scandal last year, the previous DPJ said they were going to abolish a lot of the public pension funds, you know, the Kaisan of the Kosenenkin, right? So, but doesn't that create a real concentration risk by putting it all in the PFA's hands and that making it even more dangerous if one investment goes wrong there? So is the LDP going to go through with that? And second question is, if MUFJ went bankrupt, would you bail it out?
What is?
If MUFJ went bankrupt, would you bail it out?
UFJ?
Mitsubishi UFJ Ginko, if that went bankrupt, would you actually bail them out?
The first question, AIG issue. The
AIG.
Well, it is true that DPG government announced that they're going to abolish it, but we will not do that. We will not be doing that. Instead, I think we would let each individual funds to think about, you know, what to do with them, and because it varies the degree of damage from investments. And UFJ, well, best way is to avoid that kind of situation.
The reason I ask that is because in their annual report they state in their risks that holding the amount of government bonds is one of their biggest risks.
Yeah, I think it's a kind of a general problem that you can point out, and we do have to be well aware of the fact that balance sheets is all preoccupied by, occupied by JGBs, but it's not so healthy. So we will try harder.